I'll start. All right, I think it's 3 o'clock, so we'll get started. And I decided I really don't like the podium a whole lot, and I would rather stand down here because with these glasses on, if I walk off, you're free to laugh. I'd hope, Claude, you'd come help me out, but yeah. Thank you for coming to the budget forum. I was looking back at my notes from 2000, and we had a similar one. It had been about our fourth one that we'd had in less than 2.5 years, and I think I led off with that one. We've got to stop meeting like this, and I really meant that. This is really important, and I'm glad to see a lot of people here. Thank you for coming. I'm going to try to convey to you today what I know, take a little feedback if I can, and make sure that you're on the same page that I am in terms of what I know and when we're going to know these things. There are not a lot of magic answers. If there were, we'd put out a simple email and just say, this is the way it is. This is a very human process, and this is one that, particularly for our campus, is important to do it through a process and try to involve people. So again, your attendance here today is really appreciated. If I were you, I would have come today with a couple of things on my mind. First of all, what's going to happen to me? I want to know what's going to happen to my position, or what's going to happen to my office, my desk, my department, my students. And if I had that full list of all the ramifications and the impacts, I would have printed them quickly and given them to you. Part of the answer is here, this is a process. And so today is the first step of that process to do. We've done a number of things, and it's been really busy since January when the legislature started, because last fall about this time was the first steps. The governor had written to the university and said, we're going to start withholding 1% of the money we promised to give you each quarter. That's kind of how it works. The state quarterly sends out the money to the university, and they held back 1%. And of course, our plea is, you can't do that. That's not legal. The legislature appropriated that money. And that's probably right. The trouble is going to sue, and there's always the plea that, well, that's the way it is until we change the law. And the law changed the first couple of weeks in January to reflect a budget cut. And so we've communicated about that, and we know that budget cut that was really for last year. The current year, as you all know, starts in July. And we had some mail that we've got to answer, and I want to try to talk about that a little bit. The first part was, through the spring, the president assembled budget reduction teams. I see a lot of faces out here of people who participated in that process. I appreciate that you would take that on. There was a number of areas that they looked at for reductions. Most of them were across the university system, across campuses. You know, a good response from me on a lot of these were, you're not going to find the biggest savings on the smallest campus. And there are certainly other areas, and I probably won't mention their names, but I've gone to a couple presentations where the college on another campus has more recruiters than we have for our entire campus. They have more PR people than we have for the entire campus, and that's just one college. There's lots of things that can be had for savings across the system. The budget response teams reported back several hundred responses, several hundred suggestions, some of them good, some of them just plain silly, and some of them wouldn't work at all. But through the vetting process of then a board that was composed of people from all 4 campuses, they made the recommendations. They got them down to about 75. Those were run through the president. The chancellors had a chance to see them before they went out. You've seen that email that listed the 75. And those are recommendations all the way from IT, which probably has the largest start and is well down the road towards implementation. That's probably the most mature of all of these responses. Procurement, human resources, and facilities, things like facilities management, so on, have already had groups formed, different reporting levels required, and there will be savings through all of those, some of them quickly, some of them very slowly, quite frankly, but they will be savings. The issue for all of these budget response recommendations were they saved people's jobs. So the more that savings that we could do, the fewer major cuts would have to occur across the campus. A lot of people want to equate these things to numbers of jobs, numbers of people that are going to be escorted out in the afternoon, and I don't think that's a particularly good way to do it, but I can do simple math and understand the more that we save from some of these efficiencies, the fewer disruptions we're going to have in people. Examples. Take a printer. Your desktop printers, that's one of the recommendations that are out there. Now, are we going to have John Watts, because that's who I'd have do it. I don't want to do it. Is John going to go to each one of your offices and inventory who's got a printer and who doesn't? He's probably got better things to do. We could, if we look at those printers, say, well, we'll take them all off and we'll go sell them. We'll generate some money on a surplus sale. We would get very little. The cost of doing it would take a lot longer. And it's just not a savings that we're going to get a large amount of money from. If we stop ordering supplies, yes, we can save some of that over a period of 4 or 5 years. Yeah, we aren't going to be buying any more desktop printers. You could argue we may need bigger central printers and that we aren't going to save any money. But that is an example of one of the savings. It's not going to happen right away. You're not going to automatically have a lot of savings day one. The same is true for a number of the other suggestions. I look at facilities management. It's a good example of this. Project managers that will come in, and when that first recommendation was we're going to centralize those, you know, my response at Kearney was, well, for goodness sakes, they're never going to pay attention to us. They're going to be in Lincoln and Omaha the entire time. You know, we're going to lose service because of that, and we're not going to get as much. So I go to the meeting, and I'm all prepared to launch into this. I've kind of rehearsed it a few times. I'm ready to go. And the first one out was the Med Center. Well, we don't like this. We've got 60 projects here, and you're going to spend all your time in Kearney because they squawk the loudest, and you always go do things in Kearney, and you never do them for the Med Center. So I swallowed my good speech and kind of sat on my hands. But I think that's a really good example that there's a little bit of a leap of faith, and there's some trust here that we're still going to get decent service, whether that's in HR, IT, project management, and there's going to be a few more of these. They're going to come around. So the budget response teams have those. They've been vetted. If I were you, I would take some comfort in the fact, particularly, let's say, staff. You've mobilized. You've paid attention. The sick leave payout and the vacation accrual. You saw this morning a letter. If you've not, I'm sure it's on your computers, that they're going to withhold implementation of that, primarily because of input. And that's really good. I would assume that if we had input that we don't do any of these, that's probably not going to be successful either. And it would mean that each of the campuses would just get assigned a larger cut. So they're probably trying to save somewhere in the neighborhood of $30 million, I think is a good example of what those budget response savings might be. Well, that's right, I'm not running the slides. You okay? Yeah, all right. Other things that we're going to do is tuition increases. So tuition for our students this year raised 5.4%. If we were going to raise tuition enough to cover all of the shortfalls, tuition would be 19% increase each of the next 2 years. It's just such a large sum to make up. So there is, for us, well, all the campuses, 5.4, there'll be another 3.2 next year for those increases. That's assuming that everything stays even. If the economy in the state continues to go down, the legislature will probably come into play and cut us more. We're going to have to make a philosophic discussion with the Board of Regents. Do we want to increase tuition? Because we know that when we go above 5% nationally, that harms our enrollment. Now, it's not a cliff, it's a gradual reduction, but there is a relationship there. As we go through, that will help us some. Quite frankly, President Bounds has been very helpful to us when he comes to campus, to your individual units or to an organization. You should thank him. He's the best thing we've had happen in a long time. And he's helping us through this with some one-time cash support. It's not necessarily to plug our problems. It's to help us strategically change ourselves to get in a position to reduce our expenditures. But President Bounds has been very good about sending us some one-time money to let us have some room to do this. He also has commissioned a study for the more equitable distribution of state funds. We've been after that for over 15 years. But those are not going to be free dollars. They're going to have to be for strategic improvement. They're primarily going to have to be looking at enrollment and academic improvement or academic quality. Those are right out of our strategic plan. That is not going to be hard to do, to spend that money, but it's going to be difficult. It's going to require the deans to make some very difficult choices about reorganization, about holding positions, and so on. As we do this one-time cash, so for this year, starting in July, we're short about $2.6 million. We need to own our enrollment decrease and our salary increases. So the legislature gave us no additional money to pay people any pay raises, nor did they give us any money to cover enrollment decline. So for us, that's, it's going to be about $1,700 or $1.7 million these last 2 years that we've got to make up. That's on our dime. We've got to do that. The state appropriations went down for us about $635,000. Then we also have been assigned our first BRT cut. So in other words, they're giving us credit for a cut, but they said, you've got to find it. So it's not like we got a freebie out of that. I think we've been able to locate some of that, and we'll probably do some more quickly. And then for our salaries and benefit increases, it's about $1.5 million. So those were the sums of the things that caused our budget to go deeper in the red. We did have some positives. The tuition increase raised a little over $800,000. And then we have some other cash that have been raised. So things like late fees, we've got some interest that earns on some of the revenue that we've got out there, and for projects, some of that revenue comes to us. And so that really amounts to about $1.5 million. The bottom line is we're short about $2.7 million for this year. That's going to increase next year, starting next July. That's going to go to $3.4 million because we've got the same lower number of students, less number of people paying credit hours. The salary is going to have an increase on the increase, and the bottom line is it's about $3.4 million. That's where I think we need to focus our efforts, because that's going to be a permanent reduction. This year's money is one-time money. We will be able to do that in a variety of ways. We've got to find the bottom to our enrollment, to the enrollment decline. We can't continue to start every year out down $700,000 on credit hour production. So as we begin to think of some strategies here, how are we going to take care of the one-time money? The deans and the directors have been working very hard, I think, since January. And some of them even before that. They began to hold back positions. Those are probably positions that were not luxuries, those were needs. But we've held them back. And I know that in each area, some people have had, let's say, a retirement, where another area may not have any retirements. That becomes harder to do. There's plans for restructuring. There's lots of different ways that you can approach this. But quite frankly, because of position holdbacks and hiring freezes, we've been able to free up some one-time money, as well as the deans have just held back some of that money. That was very prudent to do. And we're going to need to do that again. We've asked that the deans, the directors, athletics, student life, all look at what they have in terms of structure, what their units are, their staffing levels. 81% of our money that we spend are on us. They're on people. And so it's real hard to take, as I think John Watts accurately described, this is kind of a historic cut in terms of total dollars. It's hard to nibble around the edges and just take that away from operating. Now, we're a little nervous about the lights today, right? So if they go out, that is not an energy savings, that's just, it's called deferred maintenance. Are you doing that on purpose? Yeah? Okay. We're going to have to look at some strategic ways to change the way we spend and to staff us correctly. So to do this, we've asked that everything get put on the table. And so in November, we expect the first plans to come back from the directors and the deans and the unit operators to come to the cabinet for their recommendations. Those are specific ones. I don't believe that's going to be easy work. I suspect that is very hard. And I don't think that any of the deans, directors, or unit managers are particularly happy about doing it, but it is something we're going to wind up doing. When we get those in November, we're going to vet them. We're going to look at them. Not that everybody's plans are, how should I put smoke and mirrors? We're going to make sure every plan actually saves money. Some of them double count. We're going to make sure that they're all correct. Honestly, I don't worry about that at this point. I think they'll be pretty good. But we're going to review those. I'm going to have Budget and Finance look through them and verify the amounts. We'll do that through December. We could have a budget forum in December. I don't think that makes a lot of sense. You've got finals week. You know, we're in the middle of January or middle of December this year anyway for finals. Students are going to be, your interests are going to be in other places. Because we're going to really ask that the budget reductions start in July. That's when the major plans. So if you can save it sooner, great. But we really need this operational the 1st of July. In January, we'll share this with the campus budget advisory group. So not all that long ago, I was out in the colleges, and one of the requests from the various college communities were that we have a budget advisory group. We have formed that budget advisory group. I'm going to give it to them first. They've been a good sounding board, and we're going to vet that through them. That's populated from representatives all across campus. Once they have a chance to do that, then in early February, we will have what I would call the traditional rollout of here's what we propose to save and why, and what some of the choices were that went into that. Most of you have been through that routine, you know that drill, but we think that that's the best time because then through February and March we have time for some input. If we wait towards the end of the semester, everybody gets involved at the end of the year activities, and it doesn't work as well. We're going to try to take some of the savings that we have and leverage some one-time money that President Bounds is going to give to us. And that will help what I call a runway. So if you have positions that are going to retire, if you're going to have positions that are going to change because of reorganization, you may have to replace some of them. You may put those vacancies in some other slot in another department within your college, or we may even move them across colleges to try to have some priorities to do this. We think that we've held enough of the president's one-time money to be able to do this runway, and so that's probably $1.5 million. We're going to have some other one-time reductions that we're going to carry forward. Goal 1, we've got to figure out credit hour production. We've got to figure out where the bottom's at. 4 years ago, we had a lot more students, right? I mean, 400 or 500 more students than we have today. Did we do something in that period of time or not do something that reduced that? The economy's changed. There's more competition. Varieties of things are out there. We roughly have the same number of people. In fact, we probably have more people working here today than when we had those students. So we've got less students, but the same or larger amounts of people working. That's not accidental. That was intentional. Our goal was to save positions and to save people. At some point in time, we're going to walk through this, but credit hour production means that we're going to have to invest in figuring out where we're at from a competitive position. So we've hired a company to help us with that. They're going to come back. What I want to know, I know that we're going to study why students came, but I'm really interested in why students didn't come. That's a little harder to get at. We're going to have to go look at those students who were considering us but didn't show up. They may be telling us things that we don't want to hear, but we need to know those. Hopefully we can get that done relatively soon. If we can, then we can begin to act on that and change, maybe add into marketing different strategies, more of it in different areas. Immediately, we've changed some of our scholarship strategies. So in other words, we've offered now into Kansas and Colorado in-state tuition for students that are already eligible to be here. We're not lowering admission standards. By the way, we could do that. You know, we could add 400 students fairly easily. All we would do is we would go over to, I know it's out there somewhere. We could go say, Dusty, you admit anybody that can sign their name and the check clears. Now we've done, that has been done here, by the way. Miserable. Those students aren't as successful. Are there examples of somebody with a 15 ACT who graduates? Sure there is, but there's far more that are not. And they take a lot of our time, money, effort, and energies, and they kill our retention and graduation rates. By the way, you all should be congratulated. You know the retention rates on this campus have gone up 4% in the last year. We lead the system, right? That's pretty impressive. So, I mean, we're doing things right for students. We've also had record numbers of students graduate in the last 4 years. We've never had a greater 4-year run of students graduating in terms of numbers. The issue is filling them back in with those freshmen. The graduate programs and the online programs have saved us. They're what keep us above water right now. We also have rooms in the residence halls. So we're going to begin to leverage them for recruitment and to try to attract more students with offers for room and board rates. That's what's allowed us to be able to renovate the residence halls in the last 10 to 12 years, is those room and board rates. We can't take that money, however, from room and board and put them over into paying for our operations. We can't do printers and lights and paper and staff and faculty salaries with revenue bond rates. Now, if they have something to do with revenue bond, of course, and we do that. We allocate those, and we try to stretch that as far as we can. Obviously, if we can find other avenues of revenue, Richard Markowski's doing a great job for extramural funded activities, but for our campus and the size of our campus, that's going to be up and down. That's not going to be a steady growth cycle. There are going to be years we look like superstars, and there's other years we're going to look rather pedestrian. Question is, why can't we go use some of that money from the revenue bond? You've got money, you're building village flats is out there. You've got a new building, Otto Olson's getting ready to go up. Can't we use that money to avoid some of the budget reductions? And the answer is no. Just as when you go to your banker to borrow money to buy a house, he's not going to be real thrilled if you take the proceeds of that loan and go buy a boat, because that's not what he or she collateralized and protected their loan. That's not the purpose of that money. That's true of those building operations. They're self-supporting. For example, the Otto Olson money is coming from the state. They raised $11 million of state funds in return for the university raising tuition some 15 years ago. And we provide the other $11 million. We kind of both make a house payment on this big pool of funds. And so from us, those have been the Central Utility Plant, that's been Bruner Hall of Science. Now you're going to see the new Otto Olson building. And so those monies are, as President Bounds puts it, in a different bucket. The foundation. The question is, well, why in the world? They have $1.8 billion. Don't they have some money for us? Well, they do. But 98% of that, I think closer to 99% of it's restricted. So when you and I give money to the foundation, we give it for a certain cause. We say, I want it to go to the one room, one teacher fund for the College of Education, or I want it to go into the Arboretum Fund. They're designated funds to restrict it. There's very little money that's at the foundation that's free money in terms of very expendable and be able to put them into needs like this. Most people, well, I have not run against a donor yet who said, hey, I want to pay your light bill because the state's not giving you money. I want to do something extra. I want to give a faculty stipend, or I want to give a scholarship so a student has a chance in life. And they've been very generous with that. But they do kind of expect the state to take care of its commitment to higher education. Our priorities, our strategic plan, we did it at the right time. If you look at that strategic plan, we're going to use that when we go to President Bounds and begin to talk about why we need these additional funds to carry out our strategic plan. First and foremost is to protect academic quality and enhance our instructional spaces and our online programs. The second is we've got to take care of some of the backlog of deferred maintenance. You know, as much as I laugh about the lights in here, if we were doing this, was it Monday? Friday, you'd have been in the dark. It just left. It's dead. It needs to be fixed and worked on, and we're going to do those things. But that's all over campus. Deferred maintenance. We need to make sure that we have academic and enrollment management initiatives that give access to students. That's our mission here, is to take care of kids, particularly Nebraska kids, to give them a high quality education. So we're gonna do that and implement the strategic plan. Will be a guiding principle to us. I talked briefly about right sizing and that we've protected the number of people in the past. I think that's very, very true for this campus. But we're probably going to have to look at what is the right size for our campus. You know, we've been recognized as one of the most responsible, fiscally responsible institutions in the country, which means that we spend very little on things that are outside of the core mission. But we're like every other state entity. We're going to wind up tightening our belt a little bit. So that's the reason we've asked people to go out and look at their staffing, look at structure of departments, of colleges, look at credit hour productions, look at all of those things, because we're going to have to think differently, and we're going to ask people to do that. There's some areas that have grown. There's some areas that, it's not all doom and gloom. Online graduate programs have been great. Health science, up how many? 21, 22% in the last few years. There are areas out that are growing. It is not all doom and gloom, but we've got areas that aren't. And so we need to figure that out and march forward. Tomorrow we're going to go to the coordinating commission and talk about Otto Olson. And with that is that they're saying, well, you've got fewer numbers of students. That means you've got more classrooms you're not utilizing. We're not sure we want you to have an additional new building because you're not utilizing all your classrooms. We're going to defeat that argument, and I'm pretty comfortable that we're going to get Otto Olson approved, but the fact remains that we're going to have to look at that. So we've had to address utilization and to do it in different ways, and that isn't always the most fun to do, but I think it's going to be very productive for us, particularly when it comes to that building. Oh, yeah, I left out here when we talk about holding back on nearly 30 faculty and staff positions. Those are not eliminated positions. Those are positions we've basically suspended the search on, and we're going to take our time and decide whether those are the right places to keep those positions open, whether we need to fill them, or maybe as we begin to restructure in some places, we'll look at that differently. But that's kind of the number at the moment that we've been able to save. Had we not done that, we would be in serious shape right now. So for all the people who have been inconvenienced by that, we really appreciate it. That was the right thing to do. I'm going to look down here at John and Charlie to see if there's anything else that I need to touch on. If you will, I trust you'll do it. I'd sure appreciate questions, comments. Be glad to take those as well. I'm a no-one biter, so that's the reason they've got me up here and not down on the floor. Please, I'd welcome your input. You can also email me. I read every email I get, and we'd be glad to respond to that as well. I do think, from a staff perspective, you should feel really good, because I think you're one of the few campuses who put that input in on the number of, on the payout of the sick leave and the vacation days, and obviously that's had some impact. I'm going to have trouble seeing. Is that you, Will?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Next, I have a question. I know you can't provide us concrete specifics in terms of numbers, determination, things of that nature, but I was curious if you and your colleagues had a range of terminations you think are probably unavoidable between now and the spring of 2019. I would assume that you guys have some sense that we're not going to be able to avoid this number of
Yeah. The reason I'm going to repeat your question is, one, make sure I get it right, but two is that we're streaming this to some people who probably can't hear you. So the question was, do you have a target number of positions that you think is going to be eliminated system-wide to cover this? Obviously, you're not going to do it all with savings and efficiencies and so on. You know what has been done, there is not a target number. If there is, I've not been privy that we've got to get rid of so many people. Not a target. However, there are people who calculate and say, okay, let's say we've got $49 million in the hole. And we've got to, some tuition that'll backfill, and we're going to save $30 million on BRTs, and then they take roughly $100,000, because that's probably the average with benefits of a position, and start backing that up. And those numbers get really high. I mean, that can be in the hundreds. I don't believe that's going to happen, but I do believe that there are, you know, I hate to put a number on it. I look at the 30 that we've held. I think we're going to fill those back, or a good share of those back. But I'm not sure that's true across the university as a whole. So the bottom line is, I don't have a number. I could calculate and say we've got to fill in $15 million at $100,000 a pop. I just don't think that's accurate, but it's one way to put the number to it. Yes.
Since I got volunteered.
You got volunteered?
I got volunteered. I do think that, I think we all appreciate, especially on staff, that the things that they have done to hold back on the changes they were talking about, vacation and sick leave. But I think the thing that we continue to hear from staff here on campus is that we have always felt like they have taken the brunt, and, you know, we do so many different jobs. And in order for us to increase that enrollment that we need to see, bottom line is for us to be able to smile, the people here need to think that they're important. And I think sometimes when those kind of things are looked at, we need to remember to include that people need to be happy to be able to smile to get those students to stay here. I think ultimately, I think that's where we're headed, and you'll continue to hear from us, I think, on those type of issues.
So
It's not really a question.
No, I didn't expect it to be a question. The comment was that, look, campus morale is really important. And if we're going to have good morale, we don't like uncertainty. I don't either. But I also don't have a magic wand that can do away with the uncertainty.
Well, I think we need the communication.
Right, and the issue is that you ought to be able to freely understand why they're going in the direction they're going and where, and be able to have that input. So that's particularly true with staff. But, you know, well, actually, the faculty have the same feelings. I mean, that's, you know, they're just as uncertain about what's going to happen to their department, and the staff is as well. You know, if I look at the numbers in terms of dollar savings, you see President Bounds talk about we need to protect the academic enterprise. But he's also said, I'm going to violate that principle. So I do think that that's a good recommendation for everybody, that, you know, we're all kind of this together, and that you can't have a university without heat, lights, you can't have it without faculty, you can't have it without office associates and so on. We are all in this together. The issue is we just don't want to be treated unfairly because it's convenient. Right? Is that a fair? Okay. Where do I, oh, yeah, Claude, go ahead.
Would you say a little something about, you know, looking at this graph, this table, in terms of enrollment decline for just the last 2 years, that's $1.7 million that we're down. And I don't know what, and that number would be larger given that our enrollment has been going down for the last 5 years. I guess, could you speak to what specific elements that is going to be taking place in the next year to hopefully stabilize that, or to increase that? What are we going to do differently as compared to what we've been doing the last 5 years, since evidently it's not been working?
Claude's question was, what are we going to do differently now than we've done the last 5 years for recruiting? So let's make sure that we get this right too. This isn't all enrollment. We're lumping it as an enrollment, but what it is it's a reduction in credit hours, because that's what people write a check for, the number of credit hours. So when you go from 125 credit hours to graduate to 120, and you take that times 5,000 undergraduate students, institutionally or system-wide, we've just reduced the amount of revenue we're going to generate. We also have had enrollment decline. And so enrollment management, I think, honestly, I don't know where we'd be without them, because quite frankly, when we started with enrollment management, they did a number of, I think, positive things in terms of changing scholarshiping. They've looked at 13 metro schools plus one to concentrate on that, and there's been some success there. This is not a deal, and I think it happens so many times when it comes to when we have budget reductions that we start, whose problem is it? You know, is it their fault? Is it their problem? We definitely need to do things differently, and I think we will, but realize that the number of high school seniors also hasn't changed and has gone down. The recruiting is directly, I think, related to the number of high school seniors that are in our home base within 100 miles of us. Those kids are not there. Those enrollments in the Holdridges and the Mendons and the Broken Bows are going down. And we've got to struggle to get that home base back. And I think that's our most immediate look. When we have some excess capacity, such as residence halls, I think you're going to see us do that. I think you're going to see us take this marketing and positioning study and begin to look very candidly at ourselves about what other things are going to happen. I would invite, I tell you, I think Ed Scantling and Dusty have done a really good job of being able to have an enrollment management plan. They come out every year, they talk to people, they present this to the campus. I think people ought to pay attention to that, because I think there's some really good things in there that we need to be aware of. But it's one we got to all own. At this point, we've got to change. And so you're going to see some strategies. For example, those Colorado and Kansas scholarshiping ones we've made right away. You'll probably see us put more money into marketing. So don't expect to see marketing take a huge cut in the budget reduction plans, because we need to be able to go out and touch more students. Those are the strategy plans, I think. Yeah. Sure.
To what extent has the community of Kearney and surrounding communities, they've got a vested interest in the success of this institution and the health of this institution? How has there been communication or maybe recruiting support within the community to help in some way the university? I was thinking in terms of that whole notion of recruiting and just promoting that this is a good place for students to come.
The question was, to what extent has the community been able to help us, or will they help us, or how could we enlist them to help us more to do it? Yes, they can help us with enrollment, but from their perspective, they go, what do we say? We'll be supportive. So the chamber does call prospective students. I mean, they're in there. Where I think they could make the best advantage for us is politically. We need help at the legislature to be able to articulate how important higher education is to the state of Nebraska. If you look at the graphs, higher ed's the easy one to cut, and we have been. Nobody wants to touch Medicaid. Nobody wants to touch those services. State aid to schools is absolutely untouchable. That's where the large amounts of increases have gone over the years. But we need the community to help us politically, talk to our local legislators about, look, the university's given enough. And we find value in that. And sometimes you take the university for granted. We're here, we provide lots of employment. You all are engaged in the Kearney community more than many, many people are as a group. I look at how many people volunteer on boards or do things. The community doesn't always know what to do specifically to help us recruit. I have been to several chamber board meetings. Todd sits on the chamber. Are you going to be president? Is that a news flash? Sorry, you didn't hear that. But in case he was going to be president, we have been to several board meetings where the chamber said, what can we do? You know, they have all sorts of programming out there. For example, when students come to visit or when we have state cross-country, the state speech meets, a great example. This community rolls out the red carpet, and they understand that's really advantageous to us, but we need their political help. We probably have less political capital than I've ever seen the university have. We have pocket change right now. Variety of reasons. It goes back, you can point fingers about who's to blame for all that. The fact is, it exists. And so if we could, and maybe that's probably more on me to be able to motivate a community that they've got to come to our aid and talk to our local senators about how important this place is, not just to Kearney, it's important. Broken Bow lives on the advice that, and the students that come here. I mean, all of these communities do. So, yeah. Okay. Now, I knew you were here.
I know.
Yeah. I don't have to listen. I can hear. Yes.
I just want to thank Wilma for expressing the view she did. I just want to make sure that it's followed through on that the morale of the group that was involved in that for unused sick leave pay. Okay, that was what I called, when I made the presentation to the staff senate, is the lower tier, you know, and at that point that does affect morale.
Sure.
Our morale then adversely affects our jobs and how we perform it. That in turn affects students. And so I just want to thank the staff senate for putting out the survey, because I talked to numerous people who did not even know that that was an option. It was like it was just,
Right.
all of a sudden it was a big surprise. So I guess I would like to implore that, number one, that because it was an easy cut to make, because it was $500,000, but the people making that decision, it didn't affect them, you know, you got to think this stuff through a little bit. And I'm not talking about you, I'm just
No, I
talking
agree.
about in general.
And as Wilma and I talked, and I appreciate your echoing her support, let's take one step to the side for a second. Private business stopped doing this a long time ago. They stopped paying people for unused vacation and unleave sick leave. And why did they do it? It wasn't because they were mean, it's because they were saving money. And so I agree 100% with what you're saying. The morales are really important. I just look out that that's the reason this is a really good place to work, is that there are benefits here that aren't out there in the public arena or in the private arena. And so do I think that issue's gone? Well, it's certainly delayed for a long time. I mean, a couple of years. But could it come back? Because I think that the private sector practices will eventually come in.
And I understand that fully. But when you look at the employee handbook, it specifically says, in appreciation for, and something about for your good service, is why this
Yes, absolutely.
policy is in effect. So when that just came out of the blue, you know what that made us all feel like? Like we don't count, you know, what we do doesn't count. And then it was also brought up as to, well, what's to keep individuals who do come to work every day, who walk up to Founders, in my case, with a happy face? That really makes it hard to do that. And so, you know, it
Yeah.
just all needs to be taken into account when determining these sorts of cuts, I think, because to just zap it on everybody like that, that's just not the way you treat employees. And I understand taking that away is a good cost-saving measure, but you don't just do it all of a sudden. I was under the impression, as I worked here for almost, I don't even know how many years, a lot of years. I don't even
Not enough.
a lot. But anyway, I'm under the impression that obviously I run about 1,000 hours of sick leave. So I was under the impression, I know I don't get paid for 750. I do get paid for 250. I'm close enough to retirement age. That really did affect me, and it affected numerous other individuals that I spoke with also. So
No, well said. Thanks. David.
I have heard rumors, so I'm asking for you to either confirm or deny them. That part of the reason for our decline in enrollment in credit hours is because UNL has a target for enrollments themselves that's quite high, and so they're admitting a lot more students there that might ordinarily come here or one of the other campuses. Is this true, false, partially true, partially false?
Dave's question was, when you get fired for answering this question, what are we going to do? The candid question was, what impact has UNL had? Because they've been out talking about it. We're going to grow. Now it's a marketing issue. Okay, we're going to grow. We're going to create more dollars. There's a limited number of students in the state of Nebraska, so let's just walk through that. The number of students, the pool to recruit from has not changed. If nothing else, it's gone down. So if you're going to get to 30,000 undergraduate students, you're going to have to go to non-resident students. Now that makes some sense because they pay a higher rate and you'll be able to do that. And you're more likely to keep them for graduate school where they make more money anyway. I think there's no doubt that UNL, to make sure that they get to their enrollment goals, have had a negative impact on our campus in enrollment. Can I quantify that? How do I quantify it? I mean, do I go to the students that are in UNL saying, were you going to go to UNK till they I mean, there's no way for me to go quantify that. But I think from a recruiting perspective, from a financial aid, and from a scholarshiping perspective, there's no doubt that that's had an impact on us. Okay, so I can cry foul. That and a bagel from baristas is about all I'm going to get. I mean, we are in the system together. The burden's on us to go out and recruit more students. And quite frankly, I think we've got a better product to offer. I think those undergraduate students are 10 times better off being here. The issue is, how do I tell the story? And to me, that's the great challenge. So the answer is, yeah, I think they've had a negative impact on us. There's not a referee that's going to call foul and reverse that.
Can I follow up?
Sure.
What is the official reason for those increased enrollment goals at UNL?
I think they're
System-wide.
Yeah, I think they're laudatory. Do I think they have the potential? You know, if you're going to be a Big Ten school, you need to recruit more Big Ten type students, which means Chicago, Minneapolis, St. Louis, those are areas where there are growing numbers of students and the opportunity. I don't think the goals are bad. And quite frankly, UNO is the grower as well. I mean, there's more students in that UNO population. They should have some enrollment growth goals. The issue is, how do you get there? And what do you do? And it's the age-old argument, you know. UNO for years, I think I remember 10 or 15 years ago, the great fight was, well, how dare they have residence halls? They've never had them before. They're going to look like us. They're going to become a residential campus. Well, yeah, they're free to do that. And I just think it comes back that we've got to own our issue, and we got to figure out, and I have to kind of let them go at this point. Yes.
When the marketing consulting firm comes to campus to do their work, will there be opportunity for faculty and staff to provide input?
I'm looking for Kelly in the back. I think some of that's already happened, right?
Yeah, they were here last week for our focus groups.
And they had focus groups. The question was, is there an opportunity for faculty and staff, faculty to have input into this? I know they had focus groups with faculty, and they're coming back, right? And they're doing a survey back, so I think the answer, Chris, is yes. Sure, Terry.
Just a quick, the tuition, in-state tuition for Colorado, Kansas, where's the funds coming from?
Well, you've got two things to do here. One is that we're talking about reducing the rate. So you're going to hope that if you reduce the rate enough, that you're going to be able to generate a few more students that will cover the difference of this. Is this a surefire lock? No, it's a risk. That's the reason that you need to be a little careful about what you're doing. I think Ed's over there, right? Ed, wave if you think I'm out in left field. I haven't said anything yet. We think that that's a growing population of students, and particularly in Kansas, we could be competitive in that area. Honestly, we don't get a lot of students from Kansas and Colorado, and we've in the past offered a signing bonus. It wasn't enough. When we do this, we're going to be more than competitive with Colorado in-state tuition, and I think that will be attractive, but we're going to have to marshal a few more ways to market to kids. You'll probably see a lot more social media running out that direction, and those are things we can do. But yes, it's going to be done. It's got to be done. Otherwise, we're killing ourselves on remissions.
I have another one, Chancellor.
Sure.
As related to this particular new initiative, I've talked to a current faculty member from northern Kansas who came here as a wrestler, did well, and went to graduate school and now teaches here. And he's asked me several times, why is it, to what extent in terms of recruiting in these two states is there thinking of using current faculty member or using our network of alumni to help in that effort to get the word out about our community?
Yeah, the question is, to what extent can you use alumni, current faculty, and staff to go off and recruit maybe in home areas? Honestly, one of the best, most effective is our students. So if you have a student from Omaha who goes back to their high school and they go, yeah, they went to high school. Claude was a superstar athlete. I'm going to go follow him. That is effective. The trouble is there's a balance to that. Because if we would go off and say, okay, faculty, you've got to spend one day a month out recruiting. What do I say? Where do I go? I think the best thing that the faculty do, and you do it really well, but continues when we bring students on campus for visits, your willingness to talk to them and talk to the product. I mean, that's a crude term. They want to see you. They want to know who they're going to have, and you're tremendous salespeople. Because we can get them to campus. We got them. We're not lacking there. The issue is we've got to increase the number. We probably honestly made a mistake. We've always supported a unified joint application with the three campuses. We set the world on fire. We've never had so many applications. The trouble is that stressed our staff. We couldn't get to everybody. And actually, the other campuses probably got students that were just going to apply here to apply there, and became where there's more money and more scholarshiping. We probably lost on that deal. So that's probably on me and on others who decided that common application that we'd fought for years was a good idea, and it probably hurt us this year. I don't know, going in the future. But I do think that the ability for a student to see the surroundings. So that's a reason, state speech. We get a lot of people who come here to school because their first glance at Kearney was state speech program. There's not a soul here during spring break. They saw themselves in the classrooms, they saw themselves in this room, they saw themselves in the health and sports center. The speech kids are pretty academically inclined. But you repeat that for volleyball camp. I came here as an 8th grader and I'm familiar with the campus, it's easy to get around. There's a variety of things. The cross-country meet brings students in here. We have a whole variety of some of the academic programs that will have career days or exploration days where we get students on campus. The more that we can get those students to interact with the academic community, I think the better off we are. Sure.
I'd just like to ask,
You thought it was, you were trying to get Liz to raise her hand.
no, I just would like to ask a question in regard, and a follow-up kind of to Dr. Ekstrom's over there on the entity that you hired.
Sure.
Who did they actually meet with here on campus? And then I think his next question, part of his question was, will they be meeting with everybody? So in that they're coming back, is that what's going to be happening, or how is this going to be set up?
I think it's physically impractical to meet with everybody. No, I'm serious, because there are people who think that they ought to come talk to me, you know, they ought to, Kelly, can you help me at all with that?
So, surveys of existing students, surveys of alumni, surveys of prospective students, prospective parents, surveys, discussions with administration, we had the enrollment action council, we had the deans visit with them, and it's all part of gathering information and input. They're looking at tons of data, inquiry data. They're checking with the student hearing house to see who didn't come here and then following up with many of those students. So it's a broad array of looking at data and a lot of surveying.
So I really messed up by not handing the microphone to you, because I'm going to have trouble repeating all that. But I tell you what, how about, Kelly, could you do me a favor? Could you put out a summary email to campus about this study, about who they're going to do, what they're going to do, and their time frames, so that everybody knows? Would that be okay?
That would be good, because I, for one, maybe I just missed something, but
Yeah.
I absolutely did not know all that was going on. And I don't think everybody else did either. So
Right.
that's the kind of thing I was saying. It just needs,
To be candid, right, to be candid, we want to make sure that we're talking to students about decisions, you know, for what I think kids ought to come to school for. They have no interest in, you know.
we're supposed to be, you know, the recruiters, which I think we are, because we like the place we're here. But we need to know what's going on so that we can convey that accordingly, I think.
Okay. Yeah.
Follow up on the other study, the I can't even get it up, equity study between funding for essential functions. I'm curious to, if you know the numbers already, you said that one of the things we really need to work on is getting recruiting, and that costs money, so we need to perhaps fund marketing better. What is the difference between our campuses now, say, Kearney and Lincoln, between the amount that we have available on a per student basis to recruit students to use tuition remissions? This is the hard money that goes out to do this. What is the gap that we're facing already?
Okay, I'm going to try to translate, because I think I know what you're talking about, to ask them the questions. One of them is the hard money that we use to recruit students are basically remissions, right? So it's forgiven tuition. We probably remit, what, 22% of tuition goes back in the form of remissions. So those are academically qualified students who are 23, I don't know, I should be looking over here to Ed, 23 ACT scores and above to do that. If you look at the Lincoln campus, they probably are at 29 or 30. They're more than that? Okay. Now, the issue is the larger you are, the more you can take that risk, because you've got a little more elasticity in the numbers, but they're higher. UNO is probably a little bit higher than we are? A little bit less, okay. Then they have more part-time students, which would have less remission requests than we would have. One of the other differences are there's private support differences. I mean, they've been raising money for scholarships for, well, since the 30s. You know, and our foundation probably really didn't get started until the 80s and 90s in terms of really kicking it in gear to raise money for private scholarships.
And then what's the difference in the actual funding they have for marketing materials? You know, visiting students, sending out postcards, all of that costs money.
I'll plead ignorance. I just don't know off the top of my head. I'm going to. I assume we're on the short end of that. Yep. Here, honestly, in terms of recruiting, I'll put it in terms that I understand. We ought to be, if we had the money, we should be sending materials to kids in the 8th grade. It's expensive to do that. We don't have the, honestly, we'd have to cut more to do that. Maybe that's what we should do, but that's a policy choice we got to make. Our friends in the other campuses probably start at a much earlier age with a more aggressive campaign. I have not had a year where I've not had a regent, a legislator say, "You never send anything to my kids. You don't, you know, I've got this constituent." I have never not tracked one of those down. When they give me a name, I have tracked everyone down. I have never, ever had one that we did not send materials to. Never. And, you know, we get them from a variety of ways. We buy names. When they take the ACT, they refer us, you know, they indicate their interests. There are some kids that just plain don't want to go where mom and dad want them to go, and they don't mind saying to them, "Well, I don't know, I didn't get anything from them." And I can't solve all those problems. The bottom line is we don't spend near as much money per student to recruit as our competitors do. Now, I don't know, you go to Wayne, and, well, I know Shadron isn't. I mean, they're not spending, they can't. They don't have the money either to do that. That goes to that. It's kind of the reason I want to know where our competitive position is in the survey. I will spend, yeah, sure, Richard.
I know that Great Plains is depopulated, generally speaking.
I'm going to ask you a big favor. Could you speak up? I'm sorry.
No worries. I know that the Great Plains is depopulated. But what I find interesting is world population is increasing by 100 million per year since 2011. And so would it be possible to coordinate more of an international targeted student recruitment,
Okay.
which would solve perhaps other problems like increased out-of-state tuition?
The question was, the world's growing. It's growing exponentially where our population is probably pretty stagnant. You can. Here are the ups and downs of that. One is it's much harder to recruit. We're going to have to spend a lot more money, and it's a more risky tuition dollar. And the reason for that is if you have another 9/11, if you have other political events or military events that make visas and travel or create uncertainty about the safety of students here for a variety of reasons, if we have to balance that, because if we're relying on more international students paying a higher rate and overnight those visas get shut off, we're going to start be talking to John Watts about you got to close down units and use reserve funds because it's tough. That said, that's a good growing market. 8% of our undergraduates are probably international students now. That's probably higher than most. Well, it is.
8%?
I think that's the number. Isn't 8% of our undergraduate enrollment? Somewhere in there? Yeah. That's, here's how the policy question works. Should we spend more money to do international, or should we spend more money on first-generation students who are within 50 miles of the campus? And the answer is you probably balance that a little. There's another way to do international, though, to give them an American experience. Most of them are not four-year degree seeking, which causes us some difficulties, too. Aha.
I was going to ask a question related to that. At one time, UNK had a vibrant international education office, and we used to hear a lot about them. We had Dallas Penny recruiting from China, Japan, South Korea, and I loved how it diversified our campus. But I haven't heard much about them for the last 3 years, maybe. And our classrooms don't have as many international students who pay a lot more money as well. I just think that's a lot for us, and I know they brought in a lot of money. Now, we send students abroad, and I love when the staff are working hard, and they do a great job to send students abroad, but I just would love to see us do more recruitment of international. I think, I don't know, but it appears that we hear less and less about that.
International, I'm looking back over here. International student numbers, what? We've really not declined much, right? Yeah, so it's from 600 to 400.
That's a lot of money, though.
It is, but the makeup is, I mean, that's not all recruiting efforts either. I mean, there's a lot of geopolitical things that, and I'm not going to talk about, because then I'm going to get 10 hands come up and I'm not going to spend here all night to defend all that. But those are tough questions to ask about how much money and what the return is, because we can send a recruiter 30 miles west for a whole lot less money and get a full-time student who's more likely to succeed. But you're right. I mean, I think it's been a point of pride, and I think the community likes it. This community's been very receptive to international students. Yeah. Sure.
How much of, what percentage of scholarships come from foundation, and how much are for like first-time students, coming in to kind of entice students to a little incentive for them?
Okay. So there are two things that give students aid. One of them is direct dollars, private dollars. So the Lions Club gives them a scholarship from the Minden Rotary Club or the Minden Lions Club to come. One-time aid, those are private. I don't know the total amount of that dollar. The foundation probably generates to us $1.5 million of private support a year directly to students. They may go to the College of Business and Technology for students who are returning students who are doing well. We've got some funds that go for emergencies, students who are returning students who have emergencies. All of that goes in that $1.5 million funds. When we talk about remissions, that's money we give to students to entice them to come and to stay. And so, oh gosh, our net tuition's probably $29 million, getting close to $30 million. That's what we net. If we didn't give anybody that, we probably would be, what, 36, 37 million in there. So we spend a lot of money for those students. The trouble is, are we paying students who were going to come anyway? Paige Christensen was going to come here because she thinks the world of Nita Unruh. She was going to come here anyway. She got her mother's brains, and so she gets, I'm just using her for an example. Maybe I better say she got her mother's brains. But that student that we get a small scholarship to come, what a dean's scholarship today is $2,000. Chancellor's scholarship is $3,000, and that's per year for 4 years. If you're a Regents scholarship, you're going to get your tuition taken care of and so on. And then we add things like room and board for some of the Omaha World Herald Scholars, the Thompson Scholars. There's a wide variety of aid programs that are out there to students. But the magic is, if we could just give money to students who are undecided, but that's very hard to do. Yeah. All right. You are so patient and so kind. I really appreciate it. In review, November, we're going to have these plans from the deans, directors, and unit managers to us. You'll hear something in January when you come back that we're going to go to the Budget Advisory Committee. And so, Billy, if you talk about needing to know what everything's going on campus, those committees are really important that people are on. They go to the meetings, they come back and report to you. We have all those representatives on a lot of them, because we can't do everybody on every committee, but those representatives have, I think, some obligation to go back and tell the units what's going on. Then in February, we'll have specific plans to do that. The only thing that would make this worse is if the legislature decides to meet in special session. I don't think they will do that. They have not withheld money for the first 2 quarters. Did I see that this morning? That's really good. But I'd kind of plan the third quarter. They'll start withholding some money from us. So we may have to adjust our plans a little bit. Kelly, you're going to put that email out. Thank you. And thank you for taking time. If you didn't feel comfortable asking a question, I understand. Send me an email. I'll be glad to track it down for you. Thanks for coming.